Welcome to this week's edition of the 6-5. I'm Patrick Moorhead with More Insights and Strategy, and I am joined by my very famous co-host, Daniel Newman with Future Research. Daniel, how are you? You may notice that I have a little bit of a different background here, and I am in an undisclosed location in Colorado. And as you can see by my super exciting background, it might even be a bunker in the side of a hill. I don't know.
Well, I'm not going to speculate, Pat, as to where you might be, but my spider senses are tingling, but mostly just because you called me famous. But no, it's good to see you without your perfect step and repeat behind you. I mean, who would want to have a great branding in their podcast when you can have a very bland background of a meeting room in, I don't know, Aspen, Colorado?
Possibly. Yeah, the window I'm looking out, though, I'm looking at a mountain. There is snow, and then I see daisies. But the problem is if I turn this thing around, it's just going to make everything look dark. So, I went boring instead.
Yeah, well, you're never boring, Pat. So let's not throw names.
I appreciate that. But let's dive in here. So just as a reminder, the 6-5 represents 6 hand-picked topics that we're going to cover for 5 minutes each. This isn't about news. It is about analysis. And also, if you were thinking about making a trade, on E-Trade or something, or pick your favorite website, don't do that based on anything you've picked up for here. This should not be taken as investment advice. So let's jump in here. We have some exciting stuff so far. So AWS, the king of IaaS, very successful in PaaS and growing in SaaS, brought out a new no-code, maybe low-code environment. Daniel, what's your take?
Well, AWS launched what's called Honeycode, and you got to love the name. There's all kinds of fun names coming out of AWS these days. But over the last several months, we've seen sort of a splurge of these efforts. We saw AppSheet acquired by Google. We saw Azure, obviously Power Automate, Power Platform continue to expand its low code, no code. We've got a revolution going on, Pat. The business unit leaders, and I'm not just talking about the people that are actually the leaders like the CXOs, I'm talking about the people running businesses day in and day out, tend to be the closest in terms of understanding what customers want and need. Problem is, they're very good at Excel. They're very good at PowerPoint. They're very good at Word and email, but a lot of them aren't very good at developing code. So this makes me think of Office Space. I bring the specs down to the engineers because I'm good with people. Well, the thing is when you're trying to develop, oftentimes there's a translation problem. You have developers that understand code, and you have business people that understand business. And the reality is you need the application to fit the business, not the developer. So these no-code, low-code applications, Pat, are all about that. And AWS has the largest footprint in the world of users of public cloud, of infrastructure as a service. And while I have said outspokenly, Pat, for a while that the company has lagged a little bit in software in terms of especially SaaS, traditional apps, I believe something like what they're doing here with Honeycode puts the company in a position for greater adoption and to be more connected to the app development process, which is only going to ramp up the potential for it to grow its software business, Pat. So I'm a people person, buddy, and I understand what my customers need. But in all seriousness, I think it's a great opportunity for AWS. I believe it was a good move. It's not a one size fits all. Azure will get theirs. Google will get theirs, OutSystems and other providers. But AWS will pick up some market share just by the sheer users that are already on its platform.
Yeah, that was very similar to my hot take on this in looking at AWS is all about developers, and they've been very consistent on that for the entire time that they've been out. But developers that aren't truly developers and who might know how to do an Excel macro, not a lot of representation there. So I see them having the ability to hit their base with this pretty hard. Right now, I mean, if I'm just going to come out and say it, I think Microsoft currently has, in my opinion, the advantage, because not only with their no code, low code, and let's say full code with visual environment, they can hit everything. They can hit cloud, they can hit Android, they can hit iOS, they can hit Windows. they're a full service provider. That doesn't mean that there's not some great opportunities, particularly vertical ones. Daniel, companies that you and I both interact that might be really good, let's say at financial or in government types of verticals. But that's how I think this is likely going to wind up, is you're going to have super large companies that are horizontal plays, and then you're going to have some smaller vertical plays that keep up with all of the other applications. So some good conversation on this. Moving on, Daniel, both you and I attended HPE Discover last week virtually, and it is incredible how each company keeps adding something that's a little bit more interesting. And I thought Discover did really well at some of their highly produced segments. Okay, we saw one-on-one between Cisco's founder and HPE CEO that actually looked like they were on stage having this conversation, which I thought was pretty awesome. But you wrote a ton about this on your Future website, Daniel. So I'm going to let you dive into the content.
Yeah, Pat, I thought that was great. And you're telling me they weren't in the same room? I was certain that John Chambers and Antonio Neri were chilling, socially distanced, of course. No, you know what, Pat? It was a really interesting event, and I'm going to boil it down. There was a ton of info. And by the way, HPE is really committed to its digital events. I think it's like 4 or 5 waves of Discover. So this was like the first big wave, and it was the main launch of a lot of things. But we're going to be hearing from the company for the next month. And coming off of its most recent earnings, HPE had some big shoes to fill. The market wanted to see more. Positioning-wise, it's tracking the big hyperscalers in multi-cloud. It's tracking Dell and VMware and Tanzu. So some big announcements were really needed to fill in some gaps in the HPE story. And I thought that's exactly what the company did at Discover this year. I called my article, Pat, software is back. So, when HPE spun off all its pieces, whether the devices, the software business, technically HPE was a hardware infrastructure company. And we've seen over the last few years with the rise of point next services and then GreenLake, the company started to ease its way back in because software is the future. If semiconductors are eating the world, it's the software that sits behind them that enable businesses to do what needs to be done. So Ezmeral, the container platform, is really the answer that HPE has for a future of an agnostic approach to multi-cloud. Companies are looking to use, Kubernetes, containers, open source to be able to deliver applications into any cloud, on-premises, off-prem, and HPE delivered a software solution that's going to enable that in Ezmeral. Powerful stuff. The GreenLake Central was also very interesting because I've long stated that what's made IaaS so interesting, Pat, has been the control plane. The fact that you can have this single control plane to manage your world, both economically and technologically. And GreenLake Central is basically going to enable companies to deploy workloads across multiple clouds and manage them from a singular control plane, which is what I believe needed to happen. And this is actually a distinct advantage where HPE has and is going to be competing very well with 2 other players that I'm really pointing to here that were OEMs. First being IBM, Red Hat, and OpenShift. And second, with what I mentioned before, Dell, VMware, and Tanzu. And of course, the competition with the big cloud is going to exist, Pat. But as I see it, this is more of a partnership with the big clouds because I do believe in the future, multi-cloud will be very popular and companies are going to deploy workloads across multiple different public clouds. And having that solution to handle that from an OEM that doesn't have any skin in that game could be a great path to building a better solution. So it was a big week, I believe, for HPE. What do you think on that stuff?
Yeah, so I really liked what I saw with GreenLake and then extending it into the cloud. Although GreenLake, although there was a lot of talk of software, I really view GreenLake as a SaaS opportunity here, and they are leading the charge. I'll also say that HPE also, to me, was the leader, at least declaring that the cloud was going to be a hybrid world. And I have to give them credit for it. What I'm really looking for, Daniel, in the future is views of customer success. They've had some good success with GreenLake so far, but I have to tell you, the last 2 revisions of their software platforms didn't get a whole lot of traction. If you look at when HPE was big on OpenStack and was building that out, and OpenStack basically flamed out, with the exception of some carriers and some big retailers, and now we're on to containers. So what I want to see very quickly are customers saying, hey, I'm using this platform, and I'm betting my company on it, and I chose this over a VMware, over a Red Hat. And when I look at the extenders from the public cloud versus them, because that is the competition. But I do reinforce that I do really like the value proposition in what they're bringing to the table. Now it's just converting that into customer reality.
Yeah, I think that, and I just want to reiterate, you made some great points. I mean, first of all, it is an as a service. It is an as a service management tool, the GreenLake Central, and what's being done there. The being able to deliver everything as a service has been at the foundation of what HPE has been doing. I've been an advocate, but I'm also challenging the company to step up, because there's one thing about saying the right thing, and it's another thing about executing. So what I would say is right now, HPE is saying the right things, delivering the right set of solutions, positioning itself well to sort of sit in between the on-prem and the public cloud providers as this agnostic open source solution. But execution is going to be key. The person leading that business, Keith White, came from Microsoft. I actually might have a chance to talk to him in the near future. And one of the things, Pat, that I asked straight away is, why would you leave a rocket ship? Not to say HPE can't be great, but he was on a rocket ship. But my take is, he must have seen something that he believed he could run with. And so, Pat, over the next 6 and 12 months, I'm sure we'll be coming back to this.
Absolutely. So let's move on to a slightly different track here, and that is self-driving cars. NVIDIA recently announced a partnership with Mercedes to essentially farm out all of its self-driving cars technology for their 2024 line of self-driving cars. And I think this is a pretty big one, Daniel. If nothing else, right now, I look at Tesla as leading everybody right now. Sure, they don't have L4, but quite frankly, it's an L2 and an L2 plus world into the future. Sorry, not into the future, but right now. And that's what people are looking for. And the company is built from the ground up to be a software-defined cars. And that's whether you want to add a new performance package, braking package, or some other cool feature that you're able to monetize. And that essentially was the spirit of this announcement, which is changing the business model of the future car. Am I surprised that NVIDIA got the tap on this? No, I'm not. I mean, there's only 3 companies who would potentially get it: NVIDIA, Intel, and Qualcomm. Another thing this doesn't say is that NVIDIA runs away with this forever, or that they have the 2023 business, right? Because that's going to be another company. But what it does do is I think, people might disagree, but German car manufacturers have a different level of hurdle that they require for levels of safety. And I think that that's a big deal. And I think for Mercedes to make that commitment to NVIDIA, I think proves out, and what I think many of us think, is that NVIDIA has one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, upgradable, software-defined, autonomous platforms out there.
Oh yeah, and you covered this really well, Pat. Not a lot to add. I mean, a lot of people forget just how instrumental NVIDIA was in the earlier days of Tesla too. Tesla has taken that next level and has certainly become sort of the undisputed leader at this point in ADAS and that technology. But there are a lot of other companies that are following in its wake, and NVIDIA is still in a very strong position. You also have Intel playing in this space. You have Qualcomm playing in this space. But with what NVIDIA is doing, this is a really big win. Mercedes is a brand that has iconic reputation around the world. And by the way, nobody's innovating AI at scale more rapidly than NVIDIA. So I can't. While I'm a fan of all the companies I've mentioned, and you've heard it from me, I think all of them are doing really interesting things. Mercedes probably hitched its wagon to a very good partner for this particular technology patent, and I'm encouraged to see Tesla get better competition because 4 or 5 years ago that Tesla models were like mind-blowingly cool, but right. I would say now when I get in a Mercedes, I get in a BMW, and I get in a Lexus, it doesn't feel like Tesla's so far ahead anymore. Obviously, in the electrified vehicle part, it's still pretty darn cool. But in terms of the experience in the vehicle, all those amenities, these other technology providers have really helped these companies catch up. So I'm hoping it pushes innovation across the whole landscape.
Yeah, it's good commentary there, Daniel. And I'm wondering if I'm ever going to want an L4 and L5 car. Maybe I would for long trips.
Only if it has 800 horsepower and a combustion engine. So, okay, I'm old school. What can I say?
Listen, I like the rattle underneath when you press on that gas pedal, and even some fake type of sound isn't going to make the car rattle as I step on that thing. But for me, it's going to have to be a serious feature offset. I mean, if I could do a 5-hour drive without ever having to touch the wheel, okay, maybe I'd make the trade-off. I don't know.
Only time will tell, buddy.
Yeah. So moving on to infrastructure and cloud, there was a lot of discussion last week and a little bit the week before about potentially Dell Technologies either spinning off or buying wholesale VMware. Daniel, and I know you were super active in covering this in broadcast and also in your writings.
Yeah, well, I mean, both you and I follow the companies very closely. Both the partnership, acquisition. It was one of the more interesting acquisitions with Dell Tech holding 81% of the stock as opposed to fully acquiring it. But Dell's been sort of struggling from a stagnant valuation based upon just how good the business is. If you look at the revenue, the performance, the success, even during this COVID period of time, the value of the company should be a lot higher. And I think when I last looked, market cap was around like 36 billion. And again, I'm doing this from memory, so correct me if I'm wrong. But when you see that Red Hat was acquired by IBM for 34 billion, and then you look at the size of VMware, which is a direct competitor with a lot of other solutions, by the way, a huge customer base, a double-digit growth every quarter for as long as I can remember. And then you go, so basically the value of Red Hat by itself is as much as Dell altogether with VMware. And so I think Michael Dell, being the crafty entrepreneur that he is, and being the guy that can actually deliver value to shareholders over and over again, is looking at this and basically saying, VMware by itself is probably worth 60 to even as high as I've heard $90 billion just by itself. So talk about the opportunity to raise capital, decrease debt loads, make a huge return for all the investors that have been with the company for all these years. It's a big opportunity. And I think Dell's got to weigh the fact that it's a huge opportunity, along with the fact that VMware is one of its most exciting and promising product and solution sets for the long term, and say, is this huge windfall worthwhile of putting future business at risk? But Dell's been developing its technologies cloud. It still has a broad portfolio across Dell Tech. With that money, there's a whole bunch of things that Dell could buy again and spin up and grow and compete with. So, my feeling is, Pat, there is something to this rumor. I think the company needs to wait almost another year if they don't want to get hammered from a tax standpoint, just based upon the time from the EMC acquisition to now. So there's a little bit of a reason to maybe start these discussions, but not close them out just yet. But the numbers, Pat, just make sense. The market is not valuing the work that VMware is doing. So the short and long of it is that's the reason to make a move. And as a manager, your number one job is to bring value to shareholders. And VMware has performed and performed and performed, but the market cap has not reflected that value. So I think Dell is looking at a way to make that value immediately available to its shareholders.
That's good input, Daniel. Michael Dell and his team, they're financial masterminds. I mean, you get worth 27 to 35 billion dollars, as Michael Dell is, depending on what source you look at, without understanding this. And I mean, even when I was at public companies, we would float to the market some different structural options to get feedback and get people to do podcasts and write stories about whether it makes sense. And you get investment bankers to figure out what is best for you. And, you know, you let one slip out to somebody and they write an article about it, and you see what happens. And that's what I think is happening here is, you know, they're doing an annual look at it to see what's best. I think the challenge would be, let's say VMware's its own public company again. Who do you peg it against? I mean, what company? I mean, its closest competitor is Red Hat, which is owned by IBM. You have Nutanix. You have a couple of pure plays. I wouldn't even know who to match them against. Microsoft.
But again, do they spin off and become their own public company, or does an AWS or somebody pick it up and just, you know, grab it for the pure market share and the power it could give to expand its footprint into multi and hybrid cloud? I mean, think about what we talked about earlier with HPE.
Yeah,
you know, it would make any of the hyperscale cloud companies would become really interesting. I mean, they're already really interesting, but think of how interesting they'd be with VMware at their disposal. But Pat, I think to your point, I think Dell is looking at the financial instrument first right now, and I think the bottom line is the company's stock. I mean, it shot up in response to this move.
Right, part of the float out there, right?
Right.
You want to see what people think about this, right? Float it out there, and boom.
Yeah, I mean, I think the alternative is acquire the rest of it and take full control, and that was another option for the company. And you know, it is possible, but I don't think that's going to give that instant surge of value back to the shares. But this is the one thing, you're absolutely right. Dell, super smart, has figured out how to make acquisitions that are way bigger than ever should have been possible. And by the way, this all goes back to the EMC deal that he masterminded with Dell.
So everybody thought virtualization was dead. They wrote off VMware, and then boom, VMware becomes AWS's premier on-prem software partner, right?
Yeah. He saw things we didn't. If we saw the things he did, then maybe we would be worth 25 to 32 billion or whatever number you threw out there. But yeah, this is very interesting. This will be a story we'll have to revisit.
Definitely. So let's move on to another piece of news that came out, and that was AMD reaches its 25 by 20 energy goals that it set in 2014. So in 2014, AMD said it would improve its energy efficiency of its products by 25 times by 2020, and they reached it. Okay, and that's where we are. In fact, they went 31.7 times improvement. First off, in 2014, AMD was not in a very good place, and not just because I had departed the company.
That was the secret, but yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
But for a lot of other reasons. In fact, AMD had a very non-interesting architecture in Bulldozer that required really 5 gigahertz to make it interesting. And the problem was it required, you know, they were hitting 3 or 3.5 gigahertz. So that didn't work. And the GPU high end wasn't that interesting at all. And NVIDIA has ruled the roost ever since. But where AMD was really good was in these integrated devices that, believe it or not, putting a GPU onto a PC CPU die was a relatively interesting and unique thing. And what AMD did really do well since 2014 was they came out with their new Ryzen architecture, and they came out with multiple generations of super power efficient GPUs, and hence the 31.7 time power efficiency improvement. Now, part of it is looking back and saying, okay, we made this commitment and we surpassed it. But it's also a way to flex on Intel, which, you know, people know perceptually is having challenges. Now, Intel is making money like a government printing press. They're making money at a faster clip than the Fed is printing it because of a lot of what they're doing in the data center. But to give AMD a little credit, the perception is that AMD server CPUs and AMD desktop CPUs, and even for notebooks, are head and shoulders above what Intel can bring to the table. So I think this was really meant as a flex on Intel. What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch on it. You kind of hit on the technology part. I think the efficiency goals are just the right move right now. We are in a world where a social enterprise, a social business that's doing good across kind of a few spheres. I think the equality sphere, the sustainability sphere, the diversity sphere. These are all areas that businesses are now being judged on. And I think these are going to continue to be areas that businesses will, their response to COVID and science, their contributions when the world needs contributions from companies with resources. AMD has been a favorite of Wall Street for some time now. People really are fans, and trust me, when I've picked on the company, I've seen just how much people like AMD. But I covered at length, Pat, all the things Amazon is doing with its climate pledge, and I give credit to all companies right now that are stepping up and not just talking but executing. This will be a theme, Pat, with you and I. News is news, but when we analyze something, we're not analyzing whether it's if the news was good. We're analyzing, are these companies going to be able to execute here? And if they're not, that's going to be the delta. Well, AMD has already shown it. This isn't a result in the future. This is a result right now. So good for Lisa Su and the team over at AMD. The company continues to be a force in the chip space. That doesn't mean Intel or NVIDIA or Qualcomm or these other chip companies aren't doing interesting and good things. But again, the high tide rises all boats, and AMD is doing good things.
I'm glad you hit on the higher level corporate need for this, Daniel. Good stuff.
I love that stuff.
Yeah, I know you do. I do too. Kind of.
I'm yeah, you know me. I'm soft and touchy.
That's good. I'm glad. I try.
It's part of the picture, Pat. I mean, every company, you like it for what it builds, but you got to like it for who they are, what they represent. And so these are the things I look for in a company's longevity is what do they represent? What does the company represent? And I think AMD represents some good things right now. And I haven't always felt that way, but over the last year, it's made some good strides.
Good. So let's move to our final topic here, and that is in the collaboration space. Poly is formerly known as Polycom, and they're a leader in the UC space, released the first certification on one system for Zoom and Teams, and it's their xSeries. So the X30 and the X50, you should check them out. They're really beautiful types of products. But the key here is when you look at most UC devices that are in a conference room, in a huddle room, or even in a personal office that needs to be super secured and easy to use, typically they only use one flavor of service. And what Poly just recently brought are pieces of equipment that actually work with 5 to 6 different services. But the cool part about this announcement, Daniel, is certification. And that means it's guaranteed to work. It's guaranteed to abide by all of the service provider certifications and regulations, and in this case, from Microsoft and also from Zoom. And the reason why this is important for an enterprise to be able to flip-flop between these services is you're not locked into one service provider. You might get sick of Zoom and realize, hey, you know what? Zoom made some security promises and some privacy promises that ended up to just not be true. Or you might be a multinational corporation where that service isn't even certified to be used in that country, or worse off, it's blocked. So what I really like overall about Poly's approach, just to dial it back, is it's freeing you, the enterprise, from being locked into a service provider. And listen, as I get older, I get wise enough to know there's always going to be a lock-in, and you just need to choose what lock-in that's in. But being locked into a hardware and a software and a service platform at the same time, there needs to be some really good reasons for that. And Daniel, I know you started your career early in this space, and you've been covering UC probably longer than I have. So what's your take?
I've been covering UC longer than you've been alive. Anyone that knows us would know that's a joke. Watch the video and tell me you can't tell that. You know what, Pat? I think it's an interesting move. I think the certifications are important because people want to make sure, especially in the wake of COVID, more people working from home, that the solutions they're investing in work. I've had some really interesting discussions about the appliance and the role of the appliance. Look, we're all getting a little fatigue on our desktops and our devices. It is really nice, Pat. And you and I have dedicated Poly Studios in our office. We work with, WebEx Desk Pros. We work with different tools and solutions all day long. I actually like having a dedicated appliance. I like to be able to turn around away from my computer to a dedicated screen and use it for video. That's the kind of stuff that Poly's building. And I think seeing more and more of this type of technology in our homes and in our remote workplaces is going to become the commonplace. I think just to even get people's focus. Too easy to be doing too many things at one time. We're not meeting in person anymore. Now we're all multitasking. And so we work more hours and the quality gets worse. So there's a little bit of a solution there. I love your reference to the Zoom thing. I like choice. So what's nice about Poly is it's basically saying choice. You want to move to Citrix GoToMeeting. You want to move to Microsoft Teams. You want to move to Zoom and several other solutions. This hardware is not going to give you any trouble there. You will have the flexibility to use this hardware as you see fit. You see fit. I like that. All right. So yeah, I didn't mean to do that, but that worked out really well. So, good announcement, solid from Poly. The company, if this isn't the opportunity for Poly to be a rocket ship right now while everyone's working from home, I don't know when it'll be. This is the right moment and the right time. These are the right partnerships. A little hint, just of a guess while we're out speculating and analyzing, Pat. It'd be really interesting, but I wouldn't be 100% surprised to eventually see Poly expand support of WebEx as well. Now, again, it seems like that would never happen, but in a world where hardware and software and services are all kind of pick and choose your own adventure. And again, I have no reason to speculate this except the fact that I believe we might see that kind of expansion as Poly picks up more popularity as a piece of hardware and doesn't commit to different services so much. Why wouldn't Cisco consider it? So anyways, maybe Cisco's listening to me. Hear me out there, but nice moves. Keep going, Pat, and nice way to wrap up the show.
Awesome. So I feel like we had a good show there, Daniel, and I'm sure, we're going to do this next week, and I'm going to be broadcasting from my Snowmash/Aspen bunker again. But all our fans out there, if you liked what you heard, press that subscribe button, share that link, tell everybody what you think about this. If you didn't like what you heard, don't tell anybody, but actually you can let us know on Twitter. So with that, everybody have a great week. Daniel, it's always great to see you. You look so professional in that coat. You do look old, man, wise man, but you look good. And with that, I'm going to take us out of here. Have a great week. Take care.
See you later.